The phone rang at 3 in the morning, cutting through the silence of my bedroom, like a blade. I fumbled for it, squinting at the caller ID that showed a number I had deliberately blocked years ago. My father's voice cracked through the speaker, desperate and broken, in a way I had never heard before. He was begging for money to save his construction company, the same business he had built, while telling me for 20 years that I was his biggest mistake. The man who spent 2 decades choosing my brother Marcus over me in every single decision now needed his disappointment to rescue everything he cared about. I stared at my bank account balance, showing $8 million from my tech startup sale, remembering every cruel comparison, every ignored achievement, every moment he made it clear that Marcus was the real son, and I was just practice. Growing up in suburban Cleveland, I learned early that love had conditions I could never meet. My birth coincided with Dad's construction company, hitting its first major financial crisis. Mom died 3 days after delivery due to complications, and Dad made sure I understood the connection. He would look at me with those gray eyes and say things like, "Your mother would still be here if we had stopped while we were ahead." I was 2 when Dad met Sarah at a construction trade show, and Marcus arrived when I turned 4. From that moment, our house had a clear hierarchy that everyone understood except me. Dad owned Richardson Construction, specializing in commercial renovations across northeastern Ohio. He was a tall man with calloused hands and a voice that could command a construction site from 50 yards away. Sarah worked as his bookkeeper, and she made sure Marcus understood his special position in the family. While I struggled with reading in first grade, Marcus was already being told he was destined for greatness. Dad would ruffle Marcus's hair and announce to anyone who would listen, "This boy has the Richardson work ethic in his blood." My childhood memories center around moments of comparison. When I brought home a perfect report card in 3rd grade, Dad glanced at it and said, "Grades don't build buildings, son. Marcus can already use a level better than most adults." When Marcus failed his spelling test that same week, Dad chuckled and explained to Sarah, "Book learning isn't everything. The boy understands tools, and that's what matters in the real world." I started spending afternoons in the local library, finding refuge among books that never compared me to anyone else. Uncle Tony, Dad's business partner and younger brother, occasionally defended me in his quiet way. He would take me to job sites during summer breaks, teaching me about blueprints and measurements, while Dad focused on training Marcus to operate equipment. Uncle Tony never directly contradicted Dad, but he would slip me $20 and whisper, "Different kinds of smart dick. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." His wife Maria would invite me for dinner when the comparisons at home became particularly harsh, serving homemade pasta and asking about my interests without judgment. My best friend Jake lived 3 houses down and witnessed the family dynamics firsthand. During sleepovers, he would hear Dad lecturing me about disappointment while praising Marcus for the same behaviors I was criticized for attempting. Jake's parents treated their children equally, which made the contrast even more painful when I returned home. Jake never said much about it, but I could see the confusion in his eyes when Dad would publicly dismiss my achievements while celebrating Marcus's mediocre efforts. The summers were particularly difficult because Dad expected both sons to work construction jobs. Marcus, despite being younger, received easier tasks and constant encouragement. I was assigned the most demanding physical labor and criticized for any signs of fatigue. At age 12, I spent July days carrying 2x4s across job sites in 90-degree heat, while Dad told subcontractors, "Dick needs toughening up. Marcus here is already showing real promise." When I developed heat exhaustion during one particularly brutal afternoon, Dad sent me home early and told the crew, "Some boys just aren't cut out for real work." The breaking point of that summer came during a company picnic Dad organized for employees and their families. He stood before 50 people and introduced Marcus as my future partner and the next generation of Richardson Construction. When someone asked about me, Dad responded with a laugh, "Dick's more the indoor type. He'll probably end up working in an office somewhere." The assembled crowd looked uncomfortable, but no one challenged him. I spent the rest of the picnic sitting alone by the lake, skipping stones and wondering what I had done wrong. High school brought new opportunities for comparison. Marcus played football despite showing no particular talent, and Dad attended every game wearing a jersey with Marcus's number. I joined the debate team and computer club activities that Dad dismissed as hobbies for children who couldn't handle physical challenges. When I won the regional programming competition junior year, Dad's response was to remind me that Marcus had scored 2 touchdowns in a losing game the same weekend. The local newspaper featured my achievement in a small column, while Dad framed the sports section article about Marcus's performance. The climactic moment of this foundation came during my high school graduation party. I had just received a full scholarship to MIT for computer engineering, an achievement that should have been celebrated by any parent. Dad invited extended family and business associates to our backyard, ostensibly to honor my graduation. Instead, he used the gathering to announce that Marcus, who was barely maintaining passing grades as a sophomore, would be his designated successor at Richardson Construction. Standing before 30 people with a beer in his hand, Dad declared, "I want everyone here to know that Marcus is my real investment for the future. Dick here was good practice, helped me figure out what parenting was about, but Marcus is the son who will carry on the Richardson name and business." The silence that followed was deafening. Uncle Tony stared at his shoes, while Maria shook her head in disbelief. Sarah smiled proudly and pulled Marcus closer, as if Dad had just announced his acceptance to Harvard, instead of essentially declaring one son superior to another. I felt something break inside my chest that night, a final thread of hope that had been fraying for 18 years. Jake found me later sitting on the front porch, staring at my MIT acceptance letter, and wondering why academic excellence meant nothing compared to genetic lottery. Dad never apologized for that announcement, never acknowledged the cruelty of dismissing one child while elevating another. It was my first real understanding that some people's love comes with impossible conditions, and I had been failing to meet them since birth. MIT became my sanctuary, a place where intelligence was valued and hard work received recognition, regardless of family politics. I threw myself into computer engineering studies, while working 3 different jobs to cover expenses Dad refused to provide. He had money for Marcus's new truck and football equipment, but my dorm costs were apparently beyond the family budget. I stocked shelves at a grocery store near campus, tutored struggling students in mathematics, and cleaned laboratory equipment for the chemistry department. The combination barely covered my needs, but it taught me independence that Marcus would never learn. Professor Helen Martinez became the mentor I desperately needed. She was a brilliant woman in her 50s who had built successful software systems for major corporations before transitioning to academia. During office hours, she noticed my exhaustion from working multiple jobs and quietly arranged for me to receive a paid research position in her laboratory. Professor Martinez never asked about my family situation, but she understood struggle in a way that suggested personal experience. She would stay late to help me with complex programming problems and speak about career possibilities with the kind of enthusiasm Dad reserved for Marcus's minor football achievements. My roommate Brad came from a supportive family in Oregon, and his parents would include me in phone conversations whenever they called. Hearing normal family interactions was both comforting and painful, highlighting what I had missed throughout childhood. Brad's father asked about my studies with genuine interest and celebrated my academic achievements without comparing me to siblings. His mother would send care packages with enough food for both of us, understanding without being told that my budget was tight. They treated me like family, while my actual family focused entirely on Marcus's mediocre high school performance. During sophomore year, I started dating Amanda, a psychology major, who was studying family dynamics for her thesis research. She listened to my childhood stories with professional interest and helped me understand that Dad's favoritism wasn't caused by any deficiency on my part. Amanda explained concepts like scapegoating and golden child syndrome, giving me vocabulary for experiences I had never been able to articulate. Her academic perspective provided emotional distance from situations that had previously felt like personal failures. Back home, Dad's construction company was experiencing unprecedented success. They had landed the contract to renovate the downtown Marriott Hotel, the largest project in company history. The local business journal featured Richardson Construction on their cover, with a photo of Dad and Marcus standing before the construction site. The article described Marcus as the young visionary helping to modernize the family business, despite the fact that he was still in high school, and his primary contribution involved answering phones after football practice. My academic achievements went unmentioned in family updates, as if my scholarship to one of the world's most prestigious universities was less newsworthy than Marcus's part-time receptionist duties. The disconnect became more apparent during holiday visits home. Dad would spend dinner describing Marcus's insights about construction techniques, while dismissing my coursework as theoretical nonsense. When I explained that I was developing software applications that could revolutionize project management in construction, Dad would interrupt with stories about Marcus's practical wisdom on job sites. Sarah reinforced these dynamics by asking Marcus detailed questions about his day while treating my presence as background noise. I began to feel like a guest in my own childhood home, tolerated but not welcomed. Junior year brought my first real recognition in the tech world. I had designed a database system that optimized inventory management for Professor Martinez's research projects, and she submitted it to a national undergraduate competition. When I won first place and a $5,000 prize, I called home, expecting some acknowledgement of the achievement. Dad answered the phone and listened to my excited explanation before responding, "That's nice, son. Marcus just got named to the all-district football team. Now that's something the whole family can be proud of." The conversation lasted 30 seconds. The climactic moment of my college years occurred during Christmas break of junior year. I had planned to spend 2 weeks at home, hoping to bridge the growing gap between myself and my family. Instead, I accidentally discovered the true depth of Dad's feelings about me. I was looking for wrapping paper in his home office when the phone rang. Dad answered in the next room, speaking to someone about a construction contract. I heard him say, "Well, you know how it is with kids. Dick's not really family business material. He's too soft for this work, too academic. Marcus has the backbone that construction requires. Dick was my biggest regret, honestly. Should have stopped after Marcus came along. That boy's got everything we need for the future." The conversation continued, but I stopped listening. I quietly packed my belongings and drove back to MIT that night, 3 days before classes resumed. I never told anyone about that phone conversation, but it changed everything about my relationship with home. Amanda noticed my increased distance during phone calls with family, and Professor Martinez observed my intensified focus on academic work. I stopped calling home regularly and began making excuses to avoid holiday visits. The hurt was too deep for confrontation, so I chose gradual separation instead. Dad never asked why I became less available, which confirmed that my absence wasn't particularly noticed or mourned. The remainder of college passed with minimal family contact. I graduated summa cum laude, with a degree in computer engineering and job offers from 3 major technology companies. Dad and Sarah attended the graduation ceremony, but left immediately after claiming they needed to return for Marcus's baseball game. Professor Martinez and her husband took me to dinner that night, celebrating achievements that my biological family had barely acknowledged. As I accepted my diploma on that sunny May afternoon in Cambridge, I realized I had spent 4 years building a new identity, separate from Richardson family expectations, and the person I had become would never need their approval again. Boston became my launching pad into the professional world that valued merit over family connections. I accepted a position with Northeastern Software Solutions, a mid-sized company specializing in business applications for industrial clients. The starting salary exceeded Dad's annual income, but I never mentioned this during our increasingly rare phone conversations. My apartment in Cambridge was modest, but represented complete independence from family dynamics that had shaped my first 18 years. For the first time in my life, my achievements stood alone without comparison to Marcus's mediocre accomplishments. Jennifer Walsh. My supervisor was a demanding perfectionist who pushed her development team toward excellence. She had built her career in a male-dominated field and recognized talent regardless of background or family connections. Within 6 months, she promoted me to senior developer and assigned me to high-profile projects that other programmers avoided due to complexity. Jennifer never asked about my personal life, but she understood dedication when she saw it. My willingness to work late and tackle difficult problems earned respect that felt foreign after years of family dismissal. My coworker, Ryan Stevens, became both collaborator and close friend. He had graduated from Stanford 2 years earlier and shared my passion for innovative software solutions. Ryan came from a wealthy California family, but had chosen technology over his father's real estate empire, creating common ground between us, despite different backgrounds. We would spend lunch hours discussing business ideas and potential improvements to existing software systems. Ryan's entrepreneurial energy was contagious, and he helped me envision possibilities beyond conventional employment. Meanwhile, Marcus was settling into his role as Dad's heir, a parent at Richardson Construction. The company continued expanding, taking on larger commercial projects across Ohio and western Pennsylvania. Dad purchased new equipment and hired additional crews, positioning the business for sustained growth. Local newspapers regularly featured Richardson Construction in their business sections, always highlighting the father-son partnership between Dad and Marcus. Photos showed them standing together at construction sites, Marcus wearing a hard hat and looking serious about responsibilities he was slowly learning to handle. Marcus had graduated high school with barely passing grades, but joined the company full-time instead of pursuing college. Dad justified this decision to anyone who questioned it, explaining that practical experience was more valuable than classroom theory for construction work. Marcus's girlfriend, Crystal, supported this choice, apparently impressed by his immediate entry into management without traditional qualifications. She would post social media photos of Marcus in his work clothes, describing him as a young entrepreneur, taking over the family empire. Dad's social media presence became a constant celebration of Marcus's supposed business acumen. He would share photos from job sites with captions like, "Training the next generation of Richardson leadership," and "Marcus showing his natural instincts for quality construction." When industry publications featured Richardson Construction, Dad always ensured that Marcus was prominently mentioned as the driving force behind their success. My name never appeared in these articles, despite my growing reputation in the Boston tech community. The contrast became particularly stark when I received my first major promotion at Northeastern Software Solutions. Jennifer announced that I would be leading development of a revolutionary project management system designed specifically for construction companies. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was becoming an expert in software solutions for the exact industry that had rejected me. I was developing tools that could streamline operations for companies like Richardson Construction, but Dad had never asked for my professional insights or acknowledged my expertise in relevant technology. I decided to reach out, despite past disappointments, hoping that professional success might finally bridge our personal gap. I called Dad on a Saturday afternoon, when I knew he would be home planning to explain how my new project could benefit his business operations. The conversation started normally enough, with Dad asking about Boston weather and my general well-being. When I began describing the construction management software I was developing, his interest immediately shifted. "I don't have time for your computer games, Dick," he interrupted. "Marcus just landed us the new Westfield Shopping Center renovation project. 40 units, 18-month timeline, biggest contract in company history. That's real business, son. We're talking about actual construction work, not pushing buttons on screens." He spent the next 10 minutes describing Marcus's role in securing the contract, emphasizing his natural salesmanship and understanding of client needs. When I tried to explain how software could help manage such large projects, Dad's response was dismissive. We've been building things for 25 years without computers telling us what to do. Marcus understands that real work happens with tools, not keyboards. The conversation ended abruptly when Dad claimed he needed to review blueprints with Marcus for Monday morning. As I hung up the phone, I realized that my professional achievements would never matter to a man who measured success exclusively through construction accomplishments. Dad had built his identity around physical work and traditional business methods, leaving no room for appreciation of technological innovation, even when it directly applied to his industry. My expertise was worthless in his value system because it didn't involve concrete and steel. This rejection marked a turning point in my relationship with family expectations. I stopped calling home with updates about work promotions or project successes. Ryan noticed my reluctance to discuss family during our conversations, but he respected my privacy while offering consistent friendship and professional support. Jennifer continued mentoring my career development, helping me understand that validation from uninterested parties was unnecessary for professional fulfillment. I began building relationships with colleagues who appreciated my contributions without requiring family approval as prerequisite for recognition. The Westfield Shopping Center project became Dad's obsession throughout the following months. He would post weekly updates about construction progress, always featuring Marcus as the project coordinator, despite his limited experience with such complex undertakings. Local business reporters interviewed Dad about the renovation, and he consistently credited Marcus with innovative approaches to traditional construction challenges. The articles never mentioned that Richardson Construction was using outdated project management methods that my software could have improved significantly. As winter approached, I received news about my work that should have been shared with family under normal circumstances. The construction management software I had developed was selected for beta testing by 6 major companies across New England. Industry publications were planning features about innovative technology solutions, and Jennifer suggested that I prepare for speaking engagements at construction trade conferences. My expertise was becoming recognized nationally, while remaining completely unknown to the family business that could have benefited most from my innovations. I realized that Dad's rejection of my professional value was complete and permanent. He had chosen to define our relationship through childhood dynamics rather than adult accomplishments, making my success irrelevant to his perception of my worth. This understanding was liberating rather than devastating, because it freed me from seeking approval that would never be granted regardless of my achievements. I began planning my career path without considering family opinions, focused entirely on building success that satisfied my own standards, rather than attempting to meet impossible external expectations that had shaped my first 24 years. The decision to leave Northeastern Software Solutions came after 18 months of increasing frustration with corporate limitations. Ryan and I had developed multiple improvements to existing systems, but company bureaucracy prevented rapid implementation of our innovations. Jennifer understood our entrepreneurial ambitions and even offered to invest in any venture we might establish. Her confidence in our abilities provided validation that family approval had never delivered. We spent months developing business plans during evening hours, researching market opportunities while maintaining our day jobs. Patricia Kim became our first major investor after reviewing our comprehensive proposal for construction industry software. She was a venture capitalist who specialized in technology startups with practical applications for traditional industries. Patricia had built her wealth through careful selection of companies that solved real-world problems using innovative approaches. During our presentation, she asked detailed questions about market research and competitive analysis, treating our ideas with seriousness that Dad had never shown toward my professional work. The software we developed revolutionized project management for construction companies by integrating scheduling, inventory control, budget tracking, and communication systems into unified platforms. Ryan handled business development, while I focused on programming and system architecture. We called our company Build Tech Solutions and established offices in a converted warehouse near downtown Boston. Our first contracts came from smaller construction firms who were eager to embrace technological improvements that larger companies still resisted. Susan Thompson entered my life through a client meeting at her family's electrical contracting business. She was a project coordinator with an engineering background who immediately understood the value of our software systems. Susan had grown up around construction work, but approached it from an analytical perspective that complemented rather than competed with traditional methods. Our first conversation lasted 3 hours as we discussed ways to optimize workflows and improve communication between different trade specialists working on complex projects. Dating Susan felt natural in ways that previous relationships had not. She understood the construction industry without the prejudices that had shaped my childhood experiences. When I explained my family background, Susan listened without judgment and asked thoughtful questions about the challenges of growing up with conditional love. Her own family had supported her education and career choices, creating a foundation of confidence that made our relationship feel stable from the beginning. Susan never tried to fix my family relationships, but offered perspective that helped me understand my own emotional responses to past rejection. Meanwhile, Dad's company was struggling with the complexity of the Westfield Shopping Center project. Marcus's inexperience was becoming apparent as cost overruns mounted and deadlines were missed. Subcontractors complained about poor communication and conflicting instructions from site management. Dad was working 18-hour days, trying to maintain control over a project that had grown beyond his traditional management capabilities. The local business community began questioning whether Richardson Construction could handle large-scale commercial work without better organizational systems. Marcus was drinking heavily during this period, using alcohol to cope with pressures he wasn't equipped to handle. Crystal supported his behavior by making excuses for missed meetings and poor decision-making. Uncle Tony tried to intervene by suggesting that the company needed professional project management assistance. But Dad interpreted this as criticism of Marcus's leadership capabilities. Family dynamics prevented honest assessment of the problems, creating a cycle where mistakes were covered up rather than addressed through systemic improvements. The breaking point came when Marcus crashed the company truck after a lunch meeting with suppliers. He was arrested for driving under the influence, but Dad used his connections with local officials to minimize consequences. The accident was reported as equipment failure in insurance documents, with Dad claiming that brake problems had caused the collision. This deception protected Marcus from immediate consequences, but created legal vulnerabilities for Richardson Construction if the truth was discovered during subsequent investigations. I learned about Marcus's arrest through Jake, who still lived in Cleveland, and maintained connections with our old neighborhood. The news reached me during the same week that Build Tech Solutions was featured in Construction Industry Weekly as the year's most promising innovation for project management. The article included details about my background in the construction industry and my family connections to Richardson Construction. The irony was overwhelming. My success was being celebrated nationally, while my brother's failures were being covered up locally to protect the family business that had rejected my contributions. Dad's response to the article was predictable and devastating. He called my apartment in Boston, not to congratulate my success, but to complain about the publicity. "You're making us look bad," he said without preamble. "The article makes it sound like we don't know how to run our own business. Marcus says this computer stuff is just a passing fad, that real construction companies don't need fancy programs to do honest work." He spent 20 minutes explaining why traditional methods were superior to technological solutions, dismissing my industry recognition as marketing hype that didn't reflect genuine business value. The conversation ended with Dad's declaration that Richardson Construction would never use software developed by someone who had abandoned the family business for personal profit. "Marcus is right about you," he concluded. "You think you're too good for the work that built everything we have. Real construction happens with experience and instincts, not computer programs." When I tried to explain that I had never abandoned anything, since I was never offered a role in the family business, Dad hung up without responding to my point. This phone call represented the final destruction of any hope for family reconciliation based on professional success. Dad had chosen to interpret my achievements as criticism of his methods, rather than recognition of my abilities. His loyalty to Marcus prevented acknowledgment that my expertise could help solve problems the company was experiencing. I realized that family approval was impossible, because it would require Dad to admit that his favorite son wasn't capable of handling responsibilities he had been given, based on favoritism rather than qualifications. Ryan found me in our office that evening, staring at the Construction Industry Weekly article and processing the emotional impact of Dad's rejection. Without asking for details, Ryan understood that my family had failed to celebrate success that our industry peers considered remarkable. He suggested that we focus entirely on building our business, rather than attempting to maintain relationships with people who couldn't appreciate our accomplishments. His practical approach helped me channel disappointment into determination, using family rejection as motivation for continued professional growth. I decided that night to completely separate my professional life from family expectations. Dad had made clear that my success would never earn his respect or change his opinion of my value compared to Marcus. This understanding was liberating, because it freed me from seeking validation that was impossible to achieve. I changed my phone number without providing the new contact information to family members, creating physical and emotional distance necessary for building life, independent from childhood dynamics that had shaped my self-perception for 26 years. Build Tech Solutions exceeded every projection we had established during our first year of operation. Construction companies across New England were implementing our software systems, reporting significant improvements in project efficiency and cost management. Ryan secured contracts with major firms in New York and Philadelphia, while I continued developing advanced features that addressed specific industry challenges. Our client list included companies with annual revenues exceeding $50 million, validating our decision to focus on sophisticated businesses rather than smaller operations that resisted technological innovation. The international expansion began when Patricia Kim introduced us to construction executives attending a trade conference in London. European companies were more receptive to technological solutions than many American firms, creating opportunities for rapid growth in overseas markets. I traveled to England, Germany, and France during the spring, establishing partnerships that would triple our revenue within 2 years. The irony wasn't lost on me that foreign businesses valued my expertise, while my own father continued dismissing software development as irrelevant to construction work. Susan and I married in a small ceremony, attended by close friends and her supportive family. Her parents treated me with warmth that felt foreign after years of conditional acceptance from my own relatives. Susan's father asked thoughtful questions about my business and expressed genuine pride in my accomplishments, providing a glimpse of what normal parental relationships should feel like. We purchased a house in Newton, an affluent suburb that represented complete departure from my childhood environment. The neighborhood was filled with professionals who measured success through achievement rather than family politics. Our son David arrived the following spring, bringing joy that put all previous struggles into proper perspective. Holding my newborn son, I understood that family relationships should be based on unconditional love rather than performance comparisons. Susan and I made commitments to support David's interests, regardless of our own preferences, ensuring that he would never experience the rejection that had shaped my childhood. The contrast between my protective feelings toward David and Dad's treatment of me highlighted the dysfunction I had endured for 26 years. Meanwhile, Richardson Construction was facing catastrophic financial difficulties due to mismanagement of the Westfield Shopping Center project. Marcus's inexperience had created cost overruns exceeding $300,000, threatening the company's ability to complete contracted work. Subcontractors were demanding immediate payment for services already provided, and the project timeline had extended 6 months beyond original estimates. Dad was borrowing against personal assets to maintain cash flow, risking everything he had built during 25 years of business operation. Uncle Tony's health was deteriorating under the stress of watching the family business collapse. He had invested his retirement savings in Richardson Construction and couldn't afford to lose everything due to poor management decisions. Maria called me for the first time in years explaining that Tony was having chest pains and sleepless nights worrying about financial ruin. She begged me to contact Dad and offer assistance, but I explained that previous attempts at communication had been rejected with hostility. Maria understood the family dynamics, but hoped that crisis might change Dad's willingness to accept help from his rejected son. Marcus's drinking problem was escalating beyond casual excess into serious addiction. He was missing morning meetings and making poor decisions that affected multiple construction projects. Crystal had left him after he became verbally abusive during arguments about his behavior. Dad was covering for Marcus's absences by claiming that he was handling off-site responsibilities, but subcontractors were noticing the lack of consistent leadership. The combination of financial pressure and personal problems was creating a downward spiral that threatened to destroy everything Dad had worked to build. Sarah finally reached her breaking point after Marcus crashed Dad's personal truck into their garage door during a drunken argument. She had tolerated his drinking and financial irresponsibility for months, but property damage and potential legal liability were beyond her tolerance level. Sarah had her own children from a previous marriage to consider, and she couldn't risk their security for Marcus's problems. She moved out temporarily, taking her teenagers to stay with her sister, while demanding that Dad choose between enabling Marcus or maintaining their marriage. The situation deteriorated further when Richardson Construction's insurance company began investigating multiple claims related to equipment damage and accidents. Marcus's DUI arrest had been covered up, but insurance investigators were discovering inconsistencies in accident reports. If the insurance fraud was proven, Dad faced potential criminal charges in addition to financial ruin. The legal implications were serious enough to threaten both his business license and personal freedom consequences that extended far beyond monetary losses. I learned about the family crisis through a series of phone calls from Jake, who maintained friendships throughout our old neighborhood. The scale of Richardson Construction's problems was becoming public knowledge as unpaid subcontractors filed liens against company assets. Local newspapers were reporting on the Westfield Shopping Center delays, identifying Richardson Construction as the primary contractor responsible for cost overruns and missed deadlines. Dad's reputation in the Cleveland construction community was being destroyed by circumstances he couldn't control due to Marcus's incompetence. The climactic moment came when Uncle Tony suffered a massive heart attack while reviewing financial documents in the Richardson Construction office. Maria found him collapsed over spreadsheets that detailed the company's mounting debts and projected bankruptcy timeline. Tony survived the initial cardiac event, but remained in intensive care for 10 days, fighting for life while worrying about business obligations he couldn't fulfill. The doctors attributed his condition directly to stress from the financial crisis threatening his livelihood and retirement security. During Tony's hospitalization, Dad finally acknowledged the severity of their situation. He called Maria to discuss liquidating company assets and closing Richardson Construction permanently, rather than continuing to accumulate debt they couldn't repay. This conversation represented the first time Dad had admitted that Marcus wasn't capable of managing the business responsibilities he had been given, based on favoritism rather than qualifications. The admission came too late to prevent disaster, but showed awareness that had been absent throughout the crisis development. Uncle Tony's final words to me came during a brief phone conversation from his hospital bed. His voice was weak but urgent as he explained the full scope of Richardson Construction's problems and begged me to intervene before complete financial collapse occurred. "Dick, you're the only one with enough success to save what we built," he whispered through labored breathing. "I know your father made mistakes, but don't let pride destroy everything. The family business means jobs for 12 people and their families." Tony died that night carrying regrets about family dysfunction that had prevented earlier intervention in the crisis. The funeral was held on a gray October morning, that matched the somber mood surrounding Richardson Construction's uncertain future. Dad looked older and more defeated than I had ever seen him, facing consequences that his favoritism toward Marcus had created. I attended the service but stood apart from family members, representing success that might have prevented the tragedy if Dad had been willing to seek assistance from his rejected son. The contrast between my stability and their crisis was obvious to everyone present, creating uncomfortable recognition that family dynamics had contributed to Uncle Tony's death. The Construction Industry Awards ceremony in Las Vegas marked the pinnacle of my professional achievement up to that point. BuildTech Solutions was named Innovator of the Year, recognizing our software's impact on construction project management across North America and Europe. I accepted the award before an audience of 1,200 industry executives, representing companies that generated billions in annual revenue. The speech I delivered emphasized practical applications of technology in traditional industries, themes that resonated with construction professionals who had initially resisted digital solutions. CNN picked up the award ceremony for their business segment, featuring a 3-minute interview about BuildTech Solutions and my background in construction. The reporter asked about my family connections to Richardson Construction, creating an opportunity to publicly acknowledge Dad's influence on my career development. Instead, I focused on industry trends and technological opportunities, avoiding personal details that might embarrass relatives who were struggling with business failures. The interview generated significant publicity for our company, while maintaining dignity regarding family relationships. The timing of this national recognition was particularly cruel, given Richardson Construction's accelerating decline. Marcus had been arrested for his second DUI within 18 months this time, after crashing into a downtown office building at 2 a.m. The building housed several small businesses, including an accounting firm and a law office, creating property damage exceeding $100,000. Dad's insurance company dropped Richardson Construction immediately, citing multiple claims and fraudulent reporting related to previous accidents that Marcus had caused. Without insurance coverage, Dad couldn't bid on new construction projects or continue existing work. Subcontractors refused to provide services without payment guarantees, and suppliers demanded cash for all materials. The business that had taken 25 years to build was collapsing within weeks, due to circumstances that responsible management could have prevented. Dad was forced to lay off employees who had worked for Richardson Construction for over a decade, destroying relationships and reputations throughout the Cleveland construction community. Detective Robert Taylor handled Marcus's arrest and called Dad to explain the legal implications of the situation. Marcus faced potential jail time if convicted, and the property damage created civil liability that could result in personal bankruptcy for the entire family. Sarah had already filed for divorce and was seeking alimony that would further strain Dad's deteriorating financial position. The combination of criminal charges, civil lawsuits, and business dissolution represented complete destruction of everything Dad had worked to accomplish. Sarah's departure was final this time, as she took her teenage children and moved to Columbus to stay with relatives. Her own kids were embarrassed by Marcus's behavior and refused to remain in Cleveland, where his reputation for irresponsible drinking was widely known. Sarah filed legal documents to prevent Dad from using jointly owned assets to cover Marcus's legal expenses or business debts. She had tolerated family dysfunction for years, but drew the line at risking her children's security for problems that Dad's favoritism had created and enabled. Uncle Tony's death had eliminated the last voice of reason within Richardson Construction's management structure. Maria was left with significant debt from medical expenses and lost income from Tony's percentage of business profits. She couldn't afford to maintain their house without Tony's contributions and was considering bankruptcy to escape financial obligations that exceeded her ability to pay. The ripple effects of Richardson Construction's collapse were destroying multiple families who had depended on business income for their livelihood and retirement security. The legal complications multiplied when insurance investigators discovered the pattern of fraudulent reporting related to Marcus's accidents. Dad faced potential criminal charges for insurance fraud, adding federal implications to state-level problems already threatening his freedom. William Chen, the family attorney, explained that Dad's attempt to protect Marcus through false reporting had created legal jeopardy that honest disclosure could have avoided. The cover-ups were more serious than the original incidents, transforming misdemeanors into felony charges that carried significant prison sentences. Nancy Phillips, the insurance investigator, interviewed multiple Richardson Construction employees about accident reports and equipment maintenance records. Her investigation revealed systematic deception designed to hide Marcus's drinking problem and protect him from consequences of irresponsible behavior. The evidence she compiled would be shared with federal prosecutors if Richardson Construction filed insurance claims related to the recent building collision. Dad's attempts to shield Marcus had created a web of legal problems that threatened to destroy both their lives. Marcus was released on bail, but immediately violated the terms by drinking and driving again within 48 hours of his court appearance. This third arrest triggered automatic jail time and revocation of driving privileges for 5 years. Dad could no longer cover for Marcus's behavior, and the repeated offenses demonstrated addiction problems that required professional treatment rather than family enabling. Marcus was facing minimum 6 months imprisonment, regardless of family connections or community standing that Dad had previously used to minimize consequences. The public humiliation reached its peak when local newspapers featured Richardson Construction's financial collapse as a cautionary tale about family business management. The articles detailed cost overruns, missed deadlines, and legal problems, while highlighting the contrast with my success in the same industry. Business reporters interviewed competitors who explained how technological innovation and professional management were essential for modern construction companies. The implicit criticism of Dad's traditional methods and resistance to change was obvious to everyone reading the coverage. At Uncle Tony's funeral, Dad committed the final act of denial that destroyed any remaining sympathy from Cleveland's construction community. Standing before 200 mourners, he blamed me for causing Tony's death through abandonment of family obligations. Tony died from heartbreak because Dick turned his back on the family business, Dad declared during his eulogy. If Dick had stayed and helped, instead of running off to play with computers, Tony would still be alive today. This family has been destroyed by selfishness and ingratitude. The assembled crowd included construction professionals who knew about my national success and Richardson Construction's self-inflicted problems. Dad's public accusations created uncomfortable silence, as people recognized the unfairness of blaming his rejected son for consequences that Marcus's incompetence and Dad's enabling had created. Jake approached me after the service to apologize for Dad's behavior, explaining that grief and desperation had driven him to make statements that contradicted obvious reality. I left the cemetery without speaking to Dad, understanding that our relationship had reached a point where reconciliation was impossible. His willingness to publicly blame me for family tragedies represented complete abandonment of truth in favor of protecting his chosen narrative about Marcus's superiority. Friends and former neighbors who witnessed Dad's accusations began questioning stories they had heard about my character and motivations for leaving Cleveland. The contrast between Dad's claims and my visible success created doubt about his credibility regarding family relationships and business decisions. The 3 a.m. phone call was still 2 weeks away, but the foundation for Dad's eventual desperation was established that afternoon in the cemetery. He had lost his business, his wife, his favored son to addiction and legal troubles, and his brother to stress-related illness. The public humiliation of blaming me for consequences he had created eliminated support from community members who had previously respected his construction expertise. Dad was approaching complete isolation, financial ruin, and personal disgrace that would soon force him to seek help from the son he had spent 28 years rejecting and publicly diminishing. The phone rang at exactly 3:17 in the morning, cutting through the silence of our Newton bedroom like an alarm bell. Susan stirred beside me as I fumbled for the device, squinting at the caller ID that showed Dad's number after years of deliberately blocked contact. His voice came through the speaker, broken and desperate in ways I had never heard before, stripped of the authority and confidence that had defined his interactions with me since childhood. He was crying actual tears that I could hear in his breathing as he begged for money to save what remained of Richardson Construction and prevent complete financial destruction. "Dick, I need $800,000, he whispered into the phone. "The lawyers say that's what it'll take to settle everything and keep me out of prison. I know we've had our differences, son, but you're the only one who's made it big enough to help. I can make you a full partner, give you half the business, anything you want. I've always believed in you, always known you were special. Please don't let everything your Uncle Tony and I built just disappear because of bad luck and circumstances beyond our control." I sat up in bed, staring at my investment account balance on the phone that showed over $8 million from BuildTech Solutions' recent sale to a multinational corporation. The same man who had called me his biggest regret for 28 years was now claiming he had always believed in my potential. The father, who had publicly stated that I killed my mother and disappointed him daily, was suddenly describing our relationship in terms that contradicted every interaction we had experienced. His desperation was complete and pathetic, but it represented the opportunity I had unconsciously prepared for throughout years of building success he had dismissed. "Dad," I said quietly, activating the recording function on my phone, "before we discuss money, I need you to help me understand something. You're telling me you always believed in me, but I have very different memories of our relationship. Can you explain why you spent my entire childhood telling people that Marcus was your real son and I was just practice? Why did you call me your biggest regret at my high school graduation party in front of 30 family members and friends?" The silence stretched for nearly a minute before Dad's voice returned, smaller and more broken than before. "I was wrong, son. I was scared and stupid, and I took it out on you because you reminded me of losing your mother. Marcus was easier because he didn't challenge me or make me think about my mistakes. You were always smarter than me, and that scared me more than I want to admit. I thought if I could make you tough, make you prove yourself, you'd be stronger for it. But I see now that I just pushed away the son who could have saved everything." His words carried the ring of manipulation rather than genuine insight, crafted to achieve immediate goals, rather than express authentic understanding of damage he had inflicted throughout my childhood and young adulthood. Dad was offering explanations that he thought I wanted to hear, but they demonstrated no real comprehension of how favoritism and public rejection had shaped my development. This conversation was about his crisis, rather than my pain, focused on obtaining assistance, rather than acknowledging harm he had caused through decades of calculated emotional abuse. "Here's what's going to happen." I continued, maintaining calm control that contrasted with his desperate pleading. "I'm going to help Marcus get professional treatment for his alcoholism, because addiction is a disease that requires medical intervention. I'll pay for the best rehabilitation program available, including ongoing therapy and support services, for as long as he needs them. But I won't give you money to save Richardson Construction or cover legal expenses that resulted from enabling his irresponsible behavior and covering up his crimes." Dad's protests came immediately, claiming that the business failure wasn't really Marcus's fault, and that external circumstances had created problems beyond family control. He insisted that Richardson Construction represented Uncle Tony's legacy and employed people who depended on their jobs for survival. His arguments avoided responsibility for management decisions that had prioritized Marcus's ego over business competence, creating the cascade of failures that destroyed everything Tony had worked to build alongside him. Additionally, I continued, "If you want any relationship with me or your grandson going forward, you'll need to publicly acknowledge your mistakes and apologize for 28 years of rejection and favoritism. Not privately between us, but publicly to the same community where you blamed me for Tony's death and claimed I abandoned family obligations. You'll tell the truth about why I left Cleveland and why Marcus wasn't qualified for responsibilities you gave him, based on preference rather than ability. This demand represented the justice that I had unconsciously sought throughout years of professional success that Dad had consistently dismissed. Public acknowledgment wouldn't repair childhood damage or restore lost years of family relationships, but it would establish truth in place of narratives Dad had constructed to protect his image and Marcus's reputation. The people who had heard his accusations against me deserved to understand the real dynamics that had shaped our family's destruction. Dad agreed to these conditions with the desperation of a man facing complete ruin, but his compliance felt hollow rather than redemptive. He would say whatever words were necessary to secure assistance, but genuine understanding of his mistakes seemed beyond his emotional capacity. The conversation ended with practical arrangements for Marcus's treatment and legal requirements for public acknowledgement, but without the healing that authentic remorse might have provided. The rehabilitation program I selected for Marcus was located in California, providing geographic distance from Cleveland's enabling environment and Dad's protective instincts. The facility specialized in addiction treatment for young adults with family business pressure and included therapy for relatives who had contributed to destructive patterns. Marcus's recovery would require confronting his own responsibility for choices he had made, rather than accepting Dad's excuses about external circumstances and bad luck. 3 weeks later, Dad published an open letter in Cleveland's Business Journal that fulfilled his agreement to acknowledge truth about our family dynamics. The letter explained that he had favored Marcus unfairly throughout childhood and failed to appreciate my academic achievements and professional success. He admitted that Richardson Construction's failure resulted from poor management decisions rather than my abandonment of family obligations. Most importantly, he retracted accusations that I had caused Uncle Tony's death through selfishness, accepting responsibility for circumstances that stress and disappointment had created. The public apology generated significant discussion within Cleveland's construction community, where many professionals had questioned Dad's version of events after witnessing my national success. Former Richardson Construction employees confirmed that Marcus had been unprepared for management responsibilities and that Dad had covered up problems rather than addressing them professionally. The letter provided closure for people who had been confused by the contrast between Dad's claims and obvious reality. Maria approached me at a memorial service we organized for Uncle Tony 6 months after his death. She explained that the insurance money and remaining business assets had been sufficient to cover her immediate needs and provide modest retirement security. More importantly, she expressed gratitude that truth had finally emerged about family relationships that had puzzled her throughout the years. Tony had often wondered privately about Dad's treatment of me, but family loyalty had prevented him from challenging favoritism that ultimately contributed to business destruction. I established the Anthony Richardson Memorial Foundation to provide educational scholarships for children from working-class families pursuing engineering and technology degrees. The foundation focused particularly on students whose academic potential was undervalued by parents who prioritized traditional career paths over intellectual achievement. Uncle Tony's name would be associated with opportunities that honored both practical construction skills and innovative thinking that modern industry required. Marcus completed his rehabilitation program and returned to Cleveland with genuine understanding of addiction's impact on his decision-making and family relationships. He found employment with a competitor of Richardson Construction, working entry-level positions that allowed him to learn construction skills properly, rather than assuming management authority he hadn't earned. His recovery included acknowledging that Dad's favoritism had handicapped his development by protecting him from consequences that might have motivated earlier maturity. Dad maintained a small residential renovation business that provided sufficient income for basic living expenses, but represented complete departure from the commercial construction empire he had once controlled. Working alone, or with single employees, he focused on quality craftsmanship rather than growth and expansion. The humility required for this scaled-back operation seemed to provide peace that his previous ambitions had never delivered. Susan and I maintained distant but civil relationships with Dad and Marcus, allowing supervised visits that prioritized our son David's well-being over extended family dynamics. David would know his grandfather and uncle, but would be protected from favoritism and comparison that had damaged previous generations. Our family gatherings emphasized David's interests and achievements without creating competition with cousins or relatives whose approval might be conditional. The most profound lesson from this experience involved understanding that seeking validation from people who have chosen not to value you is like watering a dead plant. True success comes from nurturing relationships with individuals who recognize your worth rather than forcing recognition from those who are emotionally unable or unwilling to provide it. Dad's eventual admission of mistakes came only when crisis made my assistance necessary, not from genuine understanding of damage his favoritism had inflicted throughout my development. Professional achievement had provided the resources and confidence necessary to establish boundaries with family members whose love came with impossible conditions. Financial independence allowed me to help Marcus recover from addiction, while refusing to enable Dad's denial about consequences his choices had created. Success had given me leverage to demand truth, rather than accepting manipulation disguised as affection. Watching David play in our backyard that evening after the phone call, I realized that breaking generational cycles of favoritism and conditional love was more important than any business achievement or financial milestone. My son would grow up understanding that family relationships should be based on unconditional support rather than performance comparisons. He would never wonder whether he was valued less than siblings or cousins, never question whether academic achievement mattered as much as athletic ability or traditional masculine pursuits. The call for approval that had driven my childhood and young adult years was finally over. I had built something better than Dad's acceptance, a life based on authentic relationships with people who appreciated my contributions without requiring family obligations as prerequisite for recognition. The phone would ring again occasionally, with updates about Dad and Marcus, but those conversations would never again have power to determine my sense of worth or belonging. Have you ever experienced family dynamics where love seemed conditional on meeting impossible standards? How did you break free from seeking approval from people who were unable or unwilling to provide it? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with your own experiences, please like this video and share it with others who might benefit from understanding that family dysfunction doesn't define personal worth. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming difficult relationships and building authentic success. Thank you for listening, and I hope this story helps you recognize that your value isn't determined by other people's inability to appreciate your gifts. Sometimes the greatest victory is realizing you don't need their approval anymore.